My name is Nora Bennett. I am 29 years old. For 21 years, my parents called me the slow one while my sister Claire collected Harvard degrees and inheritance promises. They mocked my dyslexia right at the dinner table, excluded me from every family decision, and paid me only a fraction of what they paid her. But on the night Claire was honored as a fully licensed attorney at a hotel on Boston Harbor in front of 300 guests, a stranger handed me an envelope, something that would expose every lie my parents had ever told about me. What they didn't know was that my grandmother had quietly watched it all, and she left me something powerful enough to overturn the entire Bennett empire. The Bennetts were an old established family in Boston, the kind of family whose name appears on hospital donor plaques and public library walls. My father Richard Bennett ran Bennett and Hale Realty, the real estate company my grandmother Ruth Hale Bennett built from a rented office in South End back in 1968. By 2026, the company was valued at $65 million. I was born with dyslexia, diagnosed at age 8. Letters on the page seemed to swim and rearrange themselves, turning simple sentences into puzzles that took 3 times as long to solve. My parents responded with shame, not support. When I was 12, they hired private tutors for Claire violin debate summer camp, an SAT tutor charging $350 an hour. When I asked whether I could get help with reading comprehension, my mother Diane only sighed. "Nora, we've already spent so much money on specialists. Not every child is cut out for academics." I believed her. I taught myself to adapt. Audiobooks became my lifeline. I developed a system of notes using diagrams and flowcharts, a way to process information beyond reading text. Every Sunday, I went to my grandmother, Ruth's apartment in Back Bay, where she taught me through stories instead of textbooks. "You read slower than most people," she once told me, her hand resting on mine, "but you see things other people miss. That's not a flaw. That's a different way of seeing." I didn't fully understand what she meant back then. But before I would understand, I still had 20 more years to survive as the Bennett family's shameful secret. There were nights I lay in bed listening to my parents brag to friends on the phone about Claire's accomplishments, debate medals, science awards, acceptance letters from prestigious universities. My name never came up in those calls. Once I asked my mother why she never bragged about me to anyone, and she just laughed lightly. "You don't have anything to brag about yet, Nora. It's fine, everyone has their own strengths." I didn't know what my strength was back then. I only knew I was always the one standing behind the door, watching the spotlight fall on someone else. Thanksgiving 201918, relatives gathered around the mahogany table in Beacon Hill. My father stood up, wine glass raised. "Claire has been accepted into Harvard Law, full scholarship." Applause, cheers. "My eldest daughter will be the first Bennett in 3 generations to attend Harvard." Then his eyes drifted down to the end of the table. "And Nora," he paused, the warmth gone from his voice. "Nora is also here." A few awkward laughs. Claire laughed along, didn't defend me. Under the table, Grandma Ruth's thin hand found mine and squeezed gently. Her eyes carried a fury directed at her own son. She said nothing at the time. But 4 months later, she called me over, saying she had something important to show me. After graduating from a public university in Massachusetts in 2021, not an Ivy, I applied to Bennett and Hale. My father agreed to hire me as a marketing coordinator, salary $44,000. That same month, Claire joined as chief legal counsel, salary $265,000 plus bonuses. My job revolved around drafting newsletters, booking conference rooms. But I watched, I listened. I discovered I had a knack for spotting patterns others missed, a skill that had compensated for my reading difficulties, now becoming something else entirely. Grandma Ruth taught me this through old contracts. Your father reads contracts like a lawyer looking for loopholes to exploit. You read them like an architect, seeing how every piece connects. In 2019, she gave me a cedar box. "Keep it safe. Don't open it yet. When the time comes, you'll know." April 2026, an email arrived, position restructuring. My position would be eliminated effective July 1. That evening, through the thin wall, I heard my parents discussing it. "We can't have her here when Claire takes over," my father said. "People will ask why she wasn't promoted." My mother answered softly, "We've done everything we could." Some children simply don't have the ability. I pressed my palm against the wall. $44,000 a year, $1,900 rent, no savings. But it wasn't the money that made my chest tighten, it was the realization that if I accepted the version of me they had built, I would forever be the family's failure, not because I had actually failed, but because I had never been given the chance. Claire's celebration party was tomorrow night. The 15th of May 2026, Boston Harbor Hotel, 300 guests. I wore a $65 black dress bought at Nordstrom Rack. Everyone else glittered in custom-designed gowns. My mother blocked my way. Couldn't you find anything nicer? You'll sit at table 24 near the service door. Try not to draw attention. Tonight is Claire's night, don't embarrass us. Near the door, a gray-haired man stood watching, his eyes finding mine. At 8:30 the lights dimmed and my father announced Claire will inherit the entire family estate. And most importantly, the CEO position when I retire. The whole room stood and applauded. No one glanced at table 24. The woman sitting next to me at table 24, a distant relative I'd met only a few times in my life, leaned over and asked Nora Wright, "So what does this mean for you?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. What could I say? That I had just been formally erased from my own family right in front of everyone who mattered most in my father's life. After the applause, the gray-haired man approached. "Miss Bennett, I'm Marcus Whitfield, your grandmother's attorney." He handed me an envelope sealed with red wax, her real will. The one your father doesn't know exists. The notary seal was dated the 3rd of February 2025, months after she gave me the wooden box. She instructed me give this to Nora on the day Richard shows her exactly who he is. Then he vanished into the crowd. I slipped out into the hallway near the kitchen, unsealing it with trembling hands. 3 pages of legal text. To my granddaughter Nora Elizabeth Bennett, I leave a special Founders Class B share valued at $2 million along with the accompanying voting, veto rights. Nora is not slow. Nora was abandoned. I will not allow my son's prejudice to continue after my death. The condition: I had to request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours or the will would be void. The deadline fell at 8:30 p.m. on May 18. Marcus waited for me at the coat check. "Your grandmother knew that if you had unlimited time, you might talk yourself out of acting. The deadline isn't punishment, it's permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to change and reclaim what belongs to you." Through the door, my father was still posing for photos with Claire. "I'll call you tomorrow," I said. "We're requesting that meeting." I want to pause here for a moment. If you've ever been dismissed by the people who are supposed to trust you most, leave a comment below saying enough. And if you want to know what happened when I walked into that boardroom, keep watching. That night, I opened the cedar box. Inside, a handwritten letter, the 1968 founding contract, and a USB drive. The letter read, "The enclosed document establishes that the founders' shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted. The USB contains something your father hoped I had forgotten. In 2019, Richard proposed reducing my voting rights, claiming I was too old to understand modern business. The real reason: he wanted full control. The board rejected the proposal. Use it wisely, Nora, not for revenge, but to demand justice." I plugged in the USB. The file: board meeting minutes, March 2019. My father's attempt to strip his own mother of her rights recorded, undeniable. The next morning, I called Barbara Chen, a board member for 28 years, an old friend of Grandma Ruth's. "An emergency meeting request needs 3 members to sign. I'm one. Richard isn't as well liked as he thinks. Thomas Reyes and Susan Kaplan have also had issues with him. I'll make a few calls." She warned me. "Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They've said terrible things my whole life," I replied. "At least now I get to answer back." That night I sat in my apartment, printed 3 copies of the will, backed up the 2019 recording on my phone, and wrote a short statement, not an accusation, just a presentation of facts. Marcus Whitfield confirmed he would attend as the authenticating attorney. Barbara texted at 11 p.m., "Petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud." I barely slept, but this time it wasn't anxiety, it was anticipation. The next afternoon, Claire called, her voice shaking with anger. What did you do? Barbara Chen hasn't requested anything in 15 years. I stayed silent. She hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, my father stormed past my cubicle, slamming his office door hard enough to rattle the windows. Through the wall, I heard him on the phone. What a waste of time. Barbara must be losing it. Nora. She can't even read a financial report. She's not a threat to anyone. I smiled for the first time in 29 years. Being underestimated felt like an advantage. 9:45 a.m. May 18, the 28th floor of the Bennett and Hale building in Back Bay. Security stopped me. You're not on the list. Claire appeared. What are you doing here? You work in marketing. My father arrived. Nora, go back to your desk. But Barbara Chen appeared at the door. I invited her. Let her in. Barbara's 28 years of authority outweighed his. Fine, Richard said coldly. Let's see how long it takes for her to embarrass herself. The oval boardroom. Grandma Ruth's portrait on the wall, her eyes seeming to watch. Chairman Robert Hartwell opened the meeting, yielding the floor to me. Before I could speak, Richard stood and preempted. Nora isn't qualified to speak. No legal training, no experience. Claire added, she also has dyslexia. Some limitations can't be overcome by effort. A few board members grew uncomfortable. Hartwell cut in. Miss Bennett is entitled to her time. I looked at both of them, my father and my sister, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, but something colder, clearer. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to protect their version of the story, the version where I was nothing. I stood, raised the will. This is the last will and testament of Ruth Hale Bennett, notarized the 3rd of February 2020. Richard's face drained of color. That's impossible. My mother's will was made in 2016. I have a copy. You have a copy of the earlier will, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Under Massachusetts inheritance law, a later valid will automatically revokes any prior document. This will was made 4 years after the one you're holding. Marcus Whitfield stepped up to the table, confirming its authenticity before the board, noting the original was held at an escrow bank. Forgery, Claire said, her voice losing its confidence. It's not, Marcus replied immediately, and I'd advise you not to allege fraud without evidence. Richard slammed the table. My mother was manipulated. She was sick at the time. Manipulated? I took out my phone. Perhaps you'd like to explain this. I played the 2019 recording, my father's voice proposing to strip Ruth of her voting rights because she doesn't understand modern business. Absolute silence filled the room. I read the passage from the will aloud. Nora is not slow. Nora was abandoned. Richard confused credentials with character, looking straight at my father. I built this company from nothing. I chose Nora. Robert Hartwell declared the will valid. I now held the veto share worth $2 million. Claire made one last attempt. You have no management experience. I'm not proposing to run the company, I replied, presenting the 2019 minutes as evidence. My father had once tried to strip his own mother of her rights. No one could refute it. After the recess, legal counsel confirmed the will was valid. Hartwell asked if I had any motion. I stood. I'm not proposing to remove Richard Bennett. I'm proposing a vote of confidence. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns. If confidence, I will not interfere with operations. Claire objected fiercely, calling it an act of revenge. No, I replied, this is the exact process my grandmother established almost 60 years ago. The vote for confidence, 7, no, confidence. Hartwell declared Richard had 30 days to resign. My father stood, looked at me for the first time, not contempt but fear. He left the room without a word. Why not just fire him? Because revenge isn't justice. Because destroying someone doesn't erase what they did. My grandmother didn't raise me to be cruel, she raised me to be fair. Richard and Diane blocked me in the hallway. You ungrateful, scheming, my father began. I didn't destroy anything, I replied. I told the truth. My mother stepped forward. We were trying to protect you. You didn't protect me. You erased me, I said. 21 years of silence, crystallizing into words. Every Thanksgiving, every time you pretended I didn't exist, that wasn't protection, that was abandonment. Richard grabbed my arm. This isn't over. We'll contest that will. Go ahead. I pulled my arm free. You'll lose and you know it. because Ruth prepared for every scenario, including this one. I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, "Nora, wait." I didn't wait. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed on my parents' faces. I leaned against the steel wall, finally letting myself breathe. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past 2 hours began to fade, leaving something unexpected, not victory, not satisfaction, but loss. I had just severed 21 years of hope that if I was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, my parents would finally see me. That hope was now dead. I had killed it myself. Richard signed his resignation on May 19, effective June 20. I wasn't there. I learned about it through an email from Robert Hartwell. The board appointed him interim CEO while searching for new leadership and offered me a position as strategic advisor to the board, allowing me to participate in major decisions while deciding my own long-term relationship with the Bayer R. Asprices R.R. company. A week later, the story hit the papers. The Boston Business Journal wrote about a dramatic transition at Bennett and Hale, though it didn't name me directly due to corporate privacy laws. But anyone in Boston real estate knew exactly what it meant. 3 investment partners requested to meet with me personally, not the board. My parents' friends suddenly grew busy. Invitations to charity events grew sparse. The Bennett name, once a key that opened every door in Boston, now carried a question mark. I didn't celebrate their social downfall, but I didn't grieve it either. 3 weeks later, my phone rang at 2 p.m. "Nora." My mother's voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Can we talk?" Just the two of us. At a coffee shop in Midtown, she was already seated when I arrived, looking much older, her careful makeup unable to hide her exhaustion. "Thank you for coming," she said, both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. "I know I don't deserve it." "What do you want Mom to apologize?" "For everything. For how we treated you. For what we said and what we never said." "Are you sorry because you regret it, or because everything has changed?" She faltered, the question hanging in the air like smoke. "Both," she finally admitted. "I'm ashamed to say it, but both." I looked at this woman who had been my mother for 29 years, who braided my hair as a child and forgot my birthday as an adult. Her apology only came after she lost her power, not out of prior remorse. "I don't owe you a relationship," I said slowly. "If you want to rebuild something, you have to prove it with time, not with tears in a coffee shop." I stood up. "I won't close the door. But I won't make any promises either." In August, 2 months later, Claire called while I was walking through Boston Common. I almost didn't answer. "Nora, I know I have no right to ask, but can we meet? I have something I need to say." We sat on a bench near the fountain. Claire looked different. The perfect armor she'd worn her whole life had cracked dark circles under her eyes, hair tied back hastily. "I've been in therapy," she said without preamble. "Since May. 3 sessions a week. It's brutal." She laughed dryly. "Turns out being the golden child isn't a gift. It's a different kind of cage. Dad expected me to be perfect. Every grade, every achievement was never enough, just the baseline for the next thing." She looked out at the fountain. "And the way they treated you, I told myself that was just how things were. That I was protecting you by not challenging them." "You weren't protecting me." "No. I was protecting myself. Because if I defended you, I'd become a target too." She finally looked at me. "That's not an excuse. It's just the truth." "What do you want from me, Claire?" "Nothing. I don't deserve anything." Her voice broke. "I just wanted you to know. I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." We sat in silence, two sisters who grew up under the same roof like strangers. "I can't go back to how things were," I finally said. "But I don't want to keep being enemies either. Maybe we start over." Slowly. Claire's eyes welled with tears. "I'd like that." In November, 6 months after the board meeting, I moved into my own apartment in South End, a 1-bedroom in an old building overlooking the street where my grandmother once walked to her first office in 1968. The rent was higher than anywhere I'd lived before, but now I could afford it. I didn't accept the board's strategic advisor position. Instead, I used part of the money from the shares to open my own space design consulting company, a small business helping Boston homeowners and small businesses optimize layout, lighting the flow of living spaces. The very skill once considered a flaw, the ability to see systems instead of words, had now become the core value in the work I did every day. Richard called once a month, short, polite conversations asking about the weather, my new apartment, my work. We both pretended the past never happened. I didn't accept his offer of reconciliation because I realized his apology only came after he lost his power, not out of genuine remorse. Diane and I had lunch every other week, slowly, awkwardly, her learning to see me as a person instead of a problem to solve, not the mother-daughter relationship I once dreamed of, but more honest than anything we'd ever had. Claire and I sometimes met for coffee on weekends, learning about each other truly for the first time. She told me about the pressure she'd carried. I told her about my loneliness. On the wall of my apartment, I hung my grandmother's portrait, the same one that had watched over the boardroom for nearly 60 years. Sometimes when the evening light hit it just right, I could almost see her smiling. "You did it, Grandma. You gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to use them. Now I understand what at 28 I couldn't yet understand." My grandmother left me the veto share not because I was better than Claire, but because she knew I wouldn't let power corrupt me the way it had corrupted my father. Dyslexia isn't a flaw, it's part of who I am, like my visual memory, my patience, my ability to see patterns others miss. The very things that once made me seem slow were exactly what let me see the truth when everyone else looked away. Richard measured people by their credentials, by their ability to perform in a boardroom. Ruth measured people by their character, their kindness, by how they treated those who couldn't defend themselves. And now finally I get to measure my own worth not by what my parents say, not by what my sister achieved, not by what anyone online thinks, by my own standard, my own measure, my own truth. There are still days I hear the old voice in my head, the voice of a 1-2-year-old girl told she wasn't good enough. But now I know how to answer it. I no longer need to prove anything to that voice. I just need to live in a way that would make my grandmother proud, not through power but through the kindness I choose to keep even when I have enough strength not to. If you're watching or reading this story and see yourself in it, if you've ever been the one overlooked, dismissed, the one they said would never amount to anything, I want you to know this: you don't need a secret inheritance to prove your worth. But you do need to give yourself permission to stop seeking validation from people who will never give it. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. They let you decide who gets to enter your life and on what terms. My family hurt me for 21 years, but I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I just needed to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself. That is the true inheritance my grandmother left me. And no one can ever take it away. If this story meant something to you, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me your story. Thank you for listening. See you next time.